Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to Our Issues Birmingham. I have a return guest who was so fascinating the last time we spoke, we weren't able to finish what I wanted to speak with him about. Bill Barnes, World War II veteran, is with us. Bill, thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
I will use this moment to remind you that the last thing we talked about was Churchill's famous speech that we would never surrender. And that's where we stopped. So my question to you is, what happened next, and when did the United States get going with this war?
Thank you. Well, you know, when Churchill announced that they would fight, Hitler and his generals met up on the French coast at Calais. And they looked across the channel at the White Cliffs of Dover, which was just 22 miles away. And they devised a plan to invade England. The date to invade England was set at September the 15th. That was Operation Sea Lion. And he said to his generals...
Now, what year is this happening? 41?
1940.
Okay, 40.
June of 1940. So that was all set up for the invasion of England. But before they invaded England, there was one thing they had to do. They had to knock the Royal Air Force out because otherwise they'd get blown out of the channel.
And they knew that.
Absolutely. So Hitler said, you know, it'll take a little while to knock the Royal Air Force out, but we're going to attack them at the airfields, manufacturing plants, and in the air. So we're going to set August the 10th as a date that we'll knock the Royal Air Force out, codename Operation Montag. He said, what we're going to do, we will make an all-out effort to knock the Royal Air Force out by that date, and then we can go ahead with our invasion on the 15th. Now, let's just take a look, see what the British had in their favor. They had done several things that were important. Number one, they had developed radar. The Germans didn't know anything about it. They had taken 5 years to put these radar stations all on the eastern part of their country. They divided their country up into 4 groups with a fighter controller over each group, a general. And then they had 2 superb fighter aircraft. The first one was the Hawker Hurricane, and the second was a Supermarine Spitfire. The Hurricane came online in about 1935 and started making deliveries to the Royal Air Force in about 1937. The Spitfire was a bit later. By 1938, they started making these Spitfire. Now, the Spitfire was the first all-metal fighter aircraft they'd ever had. It was a wonderful aircraft. It's more glamorous than the Hurricane, but the Hurricane was also a great airplane.
What was it made out of?
It was made out of fabric. And each of them had 8 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. The Hawker Hurricane had a top speed of about 325 miles an hour, but the pilots loved it because it was so maneuverable. In a tight turn, you couldn't beat it. Now, the Spitfire had more speed than that. It had 355 miles an hour top speed, Supermarine Rolls-Royce engine, and I tell you, it was a fine airplane, all metal. Now, they only had 209 Spitfires and 400 Hawker Hurricanes. The Germans had 1,300 fighter aircraft and 1,500 bombers.
Wow.
So they were greatly outnumbered. So the Battle of Britain was about to begin. And what I'd like to do right now is to pause just a minute and see what was happening in the United States. In 1940, we were going through a depression during the 30s, and we were just fighting our way out of it. We had the Atlantic on one side, the Pacific on the other side to protect our country. We were not at all interested in any new war. So what happened was the First Army went on maneuvers in New York State, and it was pitiful. They had written on the side of trucks, tank. They had stovepipes they used as artillery, broomsticks as guns. It was pathetic. Ranked militarily in the world, the United States ranked 19th, even behind little Portugal. So it was pitiful. Now, the President, Roosevelt, asked Congress for 500 new aircraft.
I think
They
he
gave
gave
him 57.
Yes, we talked about that the
It was
last time.
absolutely pathetic. Now, as far as I was concerned, I had a summer job. I was attending Ramsey High School, and I was 16 years old, and my father asked me where I was going to work. So about a block away, they had this great store called Fred Jones. They had homemade cakes, homemade ice cream. Everything was just wonderful. And I went to Mr. Jones, told him I wanted a job. He said, "Are you ready to work?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm a hard worker." He said, "Okay, here's what you do. We're going to work you 6 days a week, 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock at night. You pay us $15 a week." Yes, sir. That was a lot of money then, because you could go to a movie if you were 16 and under for 10 cents. You could buy a hamburger for 5 cents, ride the streetcar downtown for 5 cents, Coca-Colas for 5 cents.
I remember 15 cents. So while this war, the Battle of Britain had it started while you were working at Fred Jones?
The Battle of Britain had started, but we were so far away we were not interested.
So when did we get interested? Well, I tell you what, let's not go there just yet, because we're going to take a break in just a few minutes. And when we come back, let's get to the Battle of Britain and when we finally got ourselves interested into the conflict going on between Germany and the rest of Europe. This is Our Issues Birmingham. We'll be right back. Do not go away. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We're having a conversation about World War II at this point, talking with Mr. Bill Barnes, a veteran who sacrificed much to be here with us today and for the liberties that we have in this country. So, as we broke, you were telling us how outnumbered and outmanned and out-air-powered Britain was by the German fleet.
Absolutely.
So, what happened? Did they hit Dover first, or who fired the first shot?
Well, actually, what took place, nothing happened in June, but in July, the German Luftwaffe pilots started to attack shipping along the British coast. And then they went all out to knock the Royal Air Force out. They were attacking airfields and manufacturing plants, and they were engaging the Spitfires and the Hurricanes in the air, and consequently, the destruction was just tremendous. Can't believe it.
So Britain's taking a beating?
They were taking a beating.
They were.
Absolutely. So this went on and on and on, and the day came for the Royal Air Force to either stand or get defeated, and that's when Hermann Goering, who was the air marshal, he had fought in World War I, shot down about 26 aircraft. He was an ace. He was arrogant, ambitious, and a Nazi. He was in complete charge, and he was going to knock out the Royal Air Force. So these attacks continued on airfields and in the air, in the manufacturing plants. And the situation was so perilous that it looked like the invasion would take place on the 15th. And then something happened. It would take a miracle now to bail them out. And that miracle occurred. There were 2 squadrons of Heinkel bombers that were attacked in oil storage depots about 50 miles from London. The weather was awful.
As usual.
And these 2 Heinkel pilots were flying together, 2 separate aircraft, and they didn't know where they were. They were in soup, terrible weather.
And these are Germans?
These are German aircraft.
Okay.
And so they talked to one another, and one said, "Well, I don't know where we are, but why don't we salvo our bombs and go on back to Germany?" Well, now, before I continue that conversation, the cities were off limits, German cities and British cities. But
Was
when
that
these,
by agreement?
not by agreement, but they just didn't
Nobody
do it.
messed with London, for
That's
example.
right. So consequently, these two Heinkels salvoed their bombs, and they happened to be right over London. So these bombs did a lot of damage, fell on London. And I tell you, the next night, the Royal Air Force bombed Berlin. The next night, they bombed Berlin again. And Hitler went into a rage. He called in Hermann Goering, his air marshal. He said, I want you to attack London and all the British cities and teach them a lesson. So that's when the Battle of Britain really began, because the German pilots started attacking London. And it did something that was good for the Royal Air Force. It gave them time to rebuild, because then they were not attacking their airfields or their manufacturing plants, and the Royal Air Force needed that time, and they did it, and they built back.
So when do we, as the United States, take our broomsticks and stovepipes and saddle up with England?
Well, that comes a bit later. You know, the Prime Minister, little bulldog that he was, asked for help, and we sent him about 40 World War II destroyers. And his comment was, in dealing with the United States, trying to get help, it's kind of like he said, visiting a good friend of yours that has cancer. You don't get too close to him.
He had a way with words.
Yeah,
That must have been after a snoot or two. He was a drinking man, they say.
Churchill, he liked his cigar and his whiskey.
Yeah, it's not all bad.
He was a good man. But anyway, the devastation in London was just tremendous. You can't believe the fires and the devastation. Altogether, they killed 40,000 Brits in London alone. 40,000. That's tremendous.
Yes.
Now, that's
so
when,
they have our destroyer. We're using some of our Navy to help them at this point in time.
well, not our Navy, but these old World War II destroyers, we just gave them to the British, and the British used them.
Used our equipment.
Yeah, right. So little did we know as Americans, I mean, we were in a perilous time. There was Germany getting ready to invade England, and Japan planning the attack on Pearl Harbor. We didn't realize what was going on. We were in peril. I mean, suppose Hitler had taken over England, and then Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. I'm not sure we would have made it. So we owe a lot to those pilots that flew with the Royal Air Force in the Battle of Britain.
You mentioned Pearl Harbor on the Pacific front. So when Pearl Harbor occurred, Germany had already hit the coast of England, I presume. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they're already there at this point, and Britain's struggling with what limited resources
they
they
are.
have. Did that ignite America to get in the game?
Absolutely. When the
But it took Pearl Harbor to do that.
It took Pearl Harbor to do it, and well, it was a typical situation. We were all asleep at Pearl Harbor. It was during peacetime. You can imagine those young sailors going ashore in Honolulu on a Saturday night, and they were all sleeping it off on Sunday morning.
Liberty, they call that.
Liberty.
They were at Liberty. I learned that last night. When they were off, they were called at Liberty. What a nice way to say that. This is Our Issues Birmingham. I'm Tommy Spina with Bill Barnes. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We have finally gotten inflamed by the actions of the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. So what did we do at that point, and how quickly did we move?
Well, we were fortunate that our carriers were not in port. And I think that the Japanese made two big mistakes at Pearl Harbor. Number one, they didn't bomb our dry docks. Number two, the oil storage tanks were all on the hillside, and they didn't take care of that either.
They didn't have radar either, did they?
No. So consequently, we were able to repair our ships at Pearl Harbor. Now, the crisis came 6 months later when we picked up radio signals and we thought they were going to move into Midway. We couldn't be sure. So we had them at Midway radio, they were running short of fresh water. And the Japanese picked that up, and Japanese said Tora, that was what they used, code name for Midway. They're running short of water. So we knew that they were going to attack Midway, and we laid the trap. Now, the fellow that was in Torpedo Squadron 8, John Gay, the sole survivor, he and I became friends after the war, and he said, this is a funny story. He said, you know, Bill said, all my aircraft was shot down, and I was in the water by myself. And finally, PBY picked me up the next day and took me to Honolulu. And he said, Admiral came in and said, understand that your wounds are doing fine. What'd you do? He said, I soaked them in salt water. So anyway, we defeated the Jap.
So we did
Yeah.
ultimately drop the bomb on the Japanese, and that shut that down in a hurry.
That is correct. Now, what we had to do in Germany, we had to give them a deceptive presentation as to where we were going to land. We didn't want them to know we were going to land in Normandy. The Germans thought it would be Calais because we had put these dummy tanks and aircraft right across the channel. And it was rumored that Patton would lead that group. And we even found a Brit that was about 50 years old and got permission from his family to dress him up as a major, an officer, and put a satchel with a chain around his arm, took him in a mini sub, let him float ashore, and they found it, and they had all the information about the fact that the invasion would come in and get Calais.
Ah, diversion.
They had deceived them.
Yeah.
So when we finally went in to Normandy, we had over 7,000 ships. About 1,200 of them were Navy craft. The rest landing ships, merchant ships, and so forth. The Germans had the Atlantic Wall. They were pretty ready.
They were dug in.
Yeah, but Hitler, he wasn't sure that this was the invasion.
Oh.
He wanted to wait. He waited 2 days, matter of fact.
To do what?
To release his panzers on the Normandy shore against our forces.
Because he thought this was just a tease?
That's correct. So just to summarize it, we lost and the Germans together over 425,000 men. I visited that cemetery where we got 9,000 buried in Normandy. It was all just, they didn't have a chance coming ashore. No chance whatsoever. And I'd like to tell you about one individual that was a brave guy. They wouldn't take him into service because of his heart condition. That was Theodore Roosevelt. But with his pull, they had to take him. He was a brigadier general. And a friend of mine said, I saw him in July. But in late July, he had a massive heart attack, and he died. He was buried there in the cemetery and received the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Wow. Some brave people back in those days.
Pardon?
Brave people back in those days.
Very brave, because he didn't have to be there.
But it united the United States, I would think, because we now had, we came together to fight the enemies on both sides of our country. So after we get through Normandy, do we just gradually start marching forward and retaking things that Hitler had taken away from him?
That's correct. The first town that we took was a little village there in France. But, I mean, it was just little by little. It took a long time to get through France because the Germans had good defenses.
Mm-hmm.
I've visited Normandy many times, and boy, those pillboxes with those huge guns and machine guns were devastating.
Did we have any help? I know that I am Italian.
We had done one thing.
There's a joke that we had propellers on both ends of our airplane. the Italians did.
Well, what happened was there was no
They couldn't
Luftwaffe.
decide.
There was no Luftwaffe because we had knocked out the ball bearing factories and all their fuel factories.
And we did that. America
we did that. So during the invasion of Normandy, no German aircraft.
We took them out.
Took them out.
And with that, we were able to advance and gain an advantage, ultimately.
You know, I'd like to summarize it by saying war is unpleasant. However, if we're going to remain out of war, we must remain a strong nation.
Mm-hmm. Well, in this day and age, and I don't want to really talk politics, but there are a lot of threatening things going on around the world as we sit here today talking. I don't think we know what the future holds. I know that I don't know how to predict the future. But do you feel we're strong at this time? Strong enough to take on whatever comes our way?
Well, actually, you know, I can tell you about the Air Force. We've been gutted. The last two presidents that we had were not military men and gave us nothing.
So we need to work on that a bit.
And consequently, the Air Force, for example, we need 3,000 pilots right today. Just starting to get money back. My message to all Americans is if you want to remain free, you better be strong.
And with that, we're going to call it quits for now.
Good.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Glad. My pleasure.
And the rest, as they say, is history. This is Our Issues Birmingham. We'll see you next week.